Hello, everybody. For the book that I want to talk about today, it's called Return to the Source, selected text by Amílcar Cabral. And this book is basically a collection of speeches given by Amílcar Cabral to various events, such as addressing the United Nations, addressing Lincoln University, etc. And these speeches were edited by, I'm hoping I'm going to say the name right, Cabral. What I read was the new expanded edition. So the speaker, obviously, is Amílcar Cabral. And as per the Wikipedia summary of Amílcar Cabral, his full name is Amílcar Lopes Cabral. He was born September 12th, 1924, and he died January 20th, 1973. He was a Bissau Guinean and Cape Verdean agricultural engineer, political organizer, and diplomat. And he was also the half-brother to Luis Cabral. He's widely remembered as one of Africa's foremost anti-colonial leaders. And he was also a Pan-Africanist and intellectual nationalist revolutionary poet. He's also known by the nom de guerre Abel Jassy, and he led the nationalist movement of Guinea-Bissau and of the Cape Verde Islands and the ensuing war of independence in Guinea-Bissau. Unfortunately, Cabral was shot dead on January 20th, 1973, about 8 months before Guinea-Bissau's unilateral declaration of independence. He was deeply influenced by Marxism, and he became an inspiration to revolutionary socialists and national independence movements worldwide. As per 1804 Books, which is an online book retail website, this is not promo, a classic collection of essays calling for the decolonization through self-liberation for us, said Amílcar Cabral. Freedom is an act of culture, guided by the concrete realities of his people. He called for a return to the source, the title of the book, a process of decolonization through re-Africanization. He was deeply influenced by Marxism, becoming an inspiration to revolutionary socialists and national independence movements worldwide. I think the intended audience for this book is supposed to be obviously people interested in Marxist writers, activists, or has read theory before. Anyone who is interested in non-white Marxists, because there are a lot, Pan-African Marxists, and revolution in Africa during the 60s and 70s. There was kind of a boom of independence movements during that decade. The purpose of the speeches is to outline basically how to conduct a revolution. I do think Amílcar Cabral supported his thesis really well, which is kind of the root of it, an argument for a global socialist revolution. He provides a few different methods. Here's an excerpt from the text. The experience of colonial domination shows that in effort to perpetuate exploitation, the colonizer not only creates a system to repress the cultural life of colonized people, he also provokes and develops the cultural alienation of a part of a population, either by so-called assimilation of indigenous people or by creating a social gap between the indigenous elites and the popular masses. As a result of this process of dividing or of deepening the divisions in the society, it happens that a considerable part of the population, notably the urban or peasant petite bourgeoisie, assimilates the colonizer's mentality, and they consider themselves culturally superior to its own people, and ignores or looks down upon their cultural values. This situation is characteristic of a majority of colonized intellectuals, is consolidated by increases in the social privileges of the assimilated or alienated group, with direct implications for the behavior of individuals in this group in relation to the liberation movement. A reconversion of minds, of mental sets, is thus indispensable to the true integration of people into the liberation movement. Such reconversion, re-Africanization in our case, may take place before the struggle, but it is completed only during the course of the struggle through daily contact with the popular masses in the communion of sacrifice required by the struggle. Cabral's main point is connecting culture to the effectiveness of liberation struggles. He focuses on different African cultures and how they shape the approaches to collective liberation. He, given his African origins, focuses on various cultures in Africa and how these varying cultures will have different approaches to collective liberation. He believes and argues that you cannot have a successful liberation movement without proper understanding and analysis of the culture of the popular masses. He says the liberation movement must, as we have said, base its action upon thorough knowledge of this culture as well as the different levels that it reaches in each social group. The movement must also be able to discern in the entire set of cultural values of the people the essential and the secondary, the positive and the negative, the progressive and the reactionary, the strengths and the weaknesses. All this is necessary as a function of the demands of the struggle in order to be able to concentrate action on what is essential without forgetting what is secondary, to induce the development of positive and progressive elements, and to combat flexibly but with rigor the negative and reactionary elements. And finally, in order to utilize strengths sufficiently and to eliminate weaknesses or to transform them into strengths. The need for such an analysis of cultural values becomes more acute when, in order to face colonial violence, the liberation movement must mobilize and organize the people under the direction of a strong and disciplined political organization in order to resort to violence in the cause of freedom, the armed struggle for national liberation. The movement must be able to transform them into the national cultural force that undergirds and conditions the development of the armed struggle. This was a speech called National Liberation and Culture, and this was a lecture after the assassination of the first president of the Mozambique Liberation Front. It was delivered at Syracuse University, and it was translated from French by Maureen Webster. Cabral points out maybe this contradiction of rather a warning of things to heed when engaging in revolution, since these have helped to either halt or to stop completely all revolution. He says, one of the most serious errors, if not the most serious error, committed by colonial powers in Africa may have been to ignore or underestimate the cultural strength of the African peoples. But in the face of vital need for progress, the following attitudes or behaviors will be no less harmful to Africa. Indiscriminate compliments, systematic exaltation of virtues without condemning faults, blind acceptance of the values of culture without considering what presently or potentially regressive elements it contains, confusion between what is the expression of an object and material historical reality and what appears to be a creation of the mind or the product of a peculiar temperament, absurd linking of artistic creations, whether good or not, with supposed racial characteristics, and finally, the non-scientific or a scientific critical appreciation of cultural phenomena. This was also in the speech National Liberation and Culture. Cabral also discusses how the petite bourgeoisie can become alienated from their cultural roots. He says, the masses in the rural areas, like a large section of the urban population, say in all over 99% of the indigenous population untouched or almost untouched by the culture of the colonial power. Whilst it despises and suppresses indigenous culture, takes no interest in promoting culture for the masses, who are their pool for forced labor and the main object of exploitation, culture survives all these challenges and through the struggle for liberation blossoms forth again. Thus the question of a return to the source or of a cultural renaissance does not arise and could not arise for the masses of these people, for it is they who are the repository of the culture, and at the same time, the only social sector who can preserve and build it up and make history. In another speech, he says, in the course of 2 or 3 generations of colonization, a social class arises made up of civil servants, people who are employed in various branches of the economy, especially commerce, professional people, and a few urban and agricultural landowners. His indigenous petite bourgeoisie, which emerged out of foreign domination and is indispensable to the system of colonial exploitation, stands midway between the masses of the working class in town and country and the small number of local representatives of the foreign ruling class. Although they may have quite strong links with the masses and with the traditional chiefs, identical with that of the foreign minority, at the same time, while they restrict their dealings with the masses, they try to become integrated into this minority, often at the cost of family or ethnic ties, and always at a great personal cost. This came from the speech called Identity and Dignity in the context of the national liberation struggle. My overall impression of the material is that there is a lot of jargon, and that maybe the early stage theory reader like myself might find a little difficult to get through. I like Cabral. I like that he had a focus in mind with all of his speeches, and it wasn't just about, randomly manifesting this reactionary revolution, but focusing on the importance of a people's culture and of a people. And it was clear that he felt that individual and regional cultures carry a lot of weight in how revolution is shaped. And he broke it down very eloquently how, for example, there are vertical societies and there are horizontal societies, and how these two different shapes of societies receive the verbiage of socialism, and how one's cultural importances, the things that are culturally important to them, can sway the socialist revolution one way or another. Further, he urges listeners to take note of what cultural aspects could benefit or be a detriment to the revolution, even shaping their weaknesses into strength, when it comes to their culture, and use it as a tool in service of the revolution. And if we were to take a step back and look at our own culture, for example, examine Southern culture in the United States, which is objectively very different from the culture that Cabral comes from, but you can still do some sort of pattern recognition and see what aspects of Southern American culture could push the revolution further or hold it back. And the things that come to mind are hospitality, but also the church and Christianity and evangelicalism. And with that, a whole range of words relating to conservatism and potentially fascism and racism. And I think about the culture that I come from, not being from the South, but now living in the South, and I can see how the verbiage being used in, the Southern lexicon is actually pretty socialist. It's actually pretty, welcoming to a lot of the ideas of governing oneself and distributing resources to make sure that everybody has food at the table and has a table to sit at in the first place, I think about Christian values and charity being important and loving thy neighbor. That's literally one of the most famous sentences uttered in relation to the Bible. And loving thy neighbor, I think a big part of that is making sure that your neighbor is doing as well as you are doing, and that they don't have to want for anything, that you guys are close and will take care of each other. I see those aspects, and I can see how, in spite of how they're currently being used in a very anti-left leaning direction, they still are parallel to, in my opinion, parallel to the ideals of socialism. Overall, I would recommend this book for anyone who wants to read more theory. And I think that it is a very concise book because it kind of gives you an introduction into Pan-Africanism, but on a shorter scale. And I think that it's very easy if you read a paragraph and then take a step back and try to digest what you just read, and trying to put it into the words of what your day-to-day life looks like. I think that, doing that has definitely helped me connect with Cabral, as well as, doing deeper reflection with myself. Thanks for watching. Bye.